what is in your outlook is going to be the relationship of the U.S. and China from an economic perspective going forward?
Well, good to be, Romaine, with you and Scarlett today, and I hope you and your families are healthy. As you point out, the relationship with China was already deteriorating, and the coronavirus onset has only amplified that pre-existing trend of deterioration. And we're seeing it politically. There is now kind of a bipartisan consensus in Congress of a problematic relationship with China. But we're also seeing it now that view that the politicians have held is now being shared by most Americans. And in fact, there's been a recent Pew survey that suggests 2/3 of Americans now have a negative perception of China. And that is shared, frankly, also increasingly shared by corporate America, who have grown tired of the trade theft and the market access issues that we have seen. So all of those things taken together, I think the China hawks in the U.S. Will be successful in using the origins of the coronavirus as an opportunity to get tough with China in the coming months. And the rhetoric coming into the election is only going to heat up.
Absolutely. As we get closer to November, you can imagine that this is going to be a big talking point. Going back to how corporate America might be getting fed up, Sean Donnan on our trade team here at Bloomberg wrote a story in which he said, watch Elon Musk as a barometer for U.S.-China relations, because for all the tough talk about a next economic Cold War between China and the U.S., U.S. companies are still very much reliant on that Chinese market. The discussions on bringing home the supply chain ignores the fact that a lot of those companies have a presence there, have factories there, because they need to serve, they want to serve that Chinese domestic market, and they're simply not going to pull out from that, especially as growth slows down elsewhere around the world. Isn't that a bigger consideration for U.S. companies?
You know, Scarlett, it's always been a cost-benefit analysis, and the fact is that U.S. corporations and, frankly, corporations around the world were willing to put up with the difficulties and challenges of doing in business in China because they had 1.3 billion good reasons to do that, which is the size of the population and the size of the market. So there are two issues that you rightly point out. One is supply chains, and I do think what you will see coming out of this is U.S. companies and Western companies having more geographic diversity in their supply chain, so they're not reliant on any one market, especially China. And what you're going to see also, I think, is a difficulty in or a tendency for U.S. companies and Western companies to do less business in China. And by the way, that is something that is not unexpected for a whole host of reasons, including it's from the Chinese. It's in the Chinese best interest. So the Chinese have been reliant on their export economy and on manufacturing for some period of time, but they're very aware of this so-called middle-income trap. And in order to avoid that middle-income trap, they're going to have to build their consumer economy. And as a result of that, I think you're going to see pressure on both sides to continue to decouple.
So then what does that mean, Stefan, for the trade deal, the phase one part of that trade deal, and any sort of potential for phase two? Do these trade deals even matter, given the direction that the two countries seem to be going?
Well, Romaine, you know, the phase one trade deal was always somewhat suspect. And, you know, my view was managed trade is never effective and just shifts trade around the world rather than creating any new demand. And as you know, and we've talked about on your show, there weren't any fundamental systemic changes in terms of market access and Chinese state support of their companies that were accomplished in the phase one trade deal. At the heart of the phase one trade deal were commitments from China to increase imports by over $200 billion over 2017 targets of U.S. purchases of U.S. food and manufactured goods and energy. And with the Chinese economy and logistics networks now in disarray from coronavirus, frankly, I can't see how those targets can realistically now be met. And so I do think we're at real risk of having those phase one targets not being achieved, and as a result, playing into the political rhetoric that China is somehow backing away from their commitments once again. Although, in all fairness, the coronavirus was something that no one expected, and it's going to be very tough for them to meet those commitments. Demand from China of manufactured goods is going to be down just because their economy is slowing. Collapse in oil prices combined with falling energy uses is going to translate into the requirement to buy much more oil to meet their energy targets. And on the supply side, the shutdown of our meat processing facilities is going to make supplying those food targets challenging.
So very quickly here, Stefan, how do you see this blowing up, or will it be held off until after the election?
Well, look, I think there's going to be a lot of Sturm und Drang because it's a easy target for all the reasons we started out talking about, because of the popular sentiment, the political sentiment, and the corporate sentiment with China at the moment. So I don't imagine this is going to calm down. That being said, given how tenuous our economy is, I think a full trade war, or this developing into a full trade war, is also unlikely.